Welcome to the Hiding in Plain Sight podcast, where we explore the transformative power of inclusivity and the strength found in vulnerability. I'm your host, Lindsey Mazza, and with each episode, together we will go on a journey of reconnecting with all parts of ourselves to foster healing and inspire a more inclusive and compassionate world for all. So grab your headphones and settle in for soul-fulfilling discussions that will make you laugh, provoke thought, and be the catalyst for growth. Let's dive in. Welcome back, everyone, to the Hiding in Plain Sight podcast. Today we have Rasool as our guest. I'm so excited to jump right into, I'm sure, just a fascinating conversation. Jazz is an executive coach with 20 plus years experience. He's a member of the Skills and Diversity Council of Tech UK, the trade body for technology businesses in the UK, and advisory body for the UK government. He's a scientist with degrees in physics and molecular biology and has studied the quantum physics of consciousness and reality. He is the founder and director of the AI Coaching Alliance, AICA, consisting of over 470 of the world's leading coaches and researchers working on AI and technology adoption in business coaching. He is the creator of Coaching 5.0 practices that advance technology enhanced coaching practices. From 2013 to 2023, Jazz coached teams and groups of women entrepreneurs in cultivating their collective collaborative intelligence using his AI tools. Welcome, Jazz.
Thank you for inviting me on today, Lindsey.
I'm so excited to dive right in, and I think where I would love to start is I talk so much in my content and on this podcast about spirituality and manifesting and how it's connected to your vibration. And I think that there's a lot of people who have not necessarily tapped into that world because they're more science-based and they operate from a place where the two are conflicting. So I would love for you to talk about that, given your background and how really there isn't a division between the two.
No, I mean, I looked into nuclear physics and particle physics experiments and the quantum physics behind that. And when you are actually working with the mathematics of it all and you're looking at experimental results from places like CERN, then there comes a point where you are looking especially at how things come into creation. Nuclear particles, where energy is transformed into matter, for example, according to Einstein's idea that energy can be distilled and condensed into matter. So when you actually are aware of how creation happens and manifestation happens at fundamental levels in a evidence kind of based way, then eventually the question does come up where you ask yourself, is this something that can be scaled? Is this something that just happens at subatomic levels? Or can I take this up higher to, say, molecular levels or biological levels or, human scales? Is it possible to turn energy into matter? Is it possible to manifest things out of the hidden dimensions of our universe? Because that's what's going on all the time in CERN experiments to do with particle physics and those kind of things. So I started for many years to look at, is it possible to see quantum level effects like that, where things are just appearing out of nowhere and equally disappearing and going back into the quantum vacuum? Is it possible to harness that and do so at human scales? Is it possible to make things come into this world and maybe even leave this world? And if so, what's the mechanism? What's the process to actually do that? So I was looking at how this was done in a scientific, empirical, evidence-based way, for which there's lots of scientific proof and lots of experiments to show how this stuff actually goes on. And I wanted to know if it can be scaled and be something that can be engaged with at human scales. And it turns out that it can. And the main way I started to look at it was in the 1990s when I finished my master's degree. I was looking at drugs that work on the brain, and I was looking at specifically drugs that treat epilepsy anti-epileptics, and drugs that are anesthetics are used in surgery. So these are both things that affect a person's consciousness. In the case of anti-epileptic drugs, it's something that stops the brain firing off so much and causing a seizure. And when someone has epilepsy, normally they go through a mind and body change at the same time. So something's going on in their brain that's causing a mind-body shift. And in the case of anesthetics, when you are given an anesthetic, if you go into general surgery and you lose consciousness, you have to then accept that whatever that anesthetic was acting on in your body must be something to do with consciousness. It's got to be some switch or some kind of biology there that when you put anesthetic on it, it turns off your consciousness or allows it to be woken up when the anesthetic isn't there anymore. So I spent a lot of time looking at the biological, cellular sort of territory where the anesthetics act. And I found from there that the activity is switched on and off through kind of nuclear or quantum level mechanisms. And I thought, wow, this is interesting. So consciousness is something that's intimately linked to quantum level activities of energy and particles and things like that. And I thought, well, is that something we can tap into? Or do we all need to take an anesthetic in order to shift our consciousness into a different kind of state? And when I was looking at mind-body medicine from different cultures, especially in things like yoga and Chinese systems of medicine, like Tai Chi and Qigong, and other similar practices which influence the mind-body connection, and they do that through energy of various kinds. I found that when people adopted certain kinds of breathing techniques in conjunction with certain intentions in their mind, and they paid attention to that using their will and their agency, especially through breathing mediation, it was possible to alter what was going on at that level in terms of how consciousness came through into the body, but also how consciousness left the body as well. But then a little while later, I started looking at things beyond the body. Okay, fine, you can use consciousness, hypnotherapy, breathing techniques, meditation, whatever, to cause shifts in your body. There's a change in the way your brain works. That causes changes in your nervous system. That causes changes in your endocrine system and your hormones and all this kind of stuff. So a single shift in perception can actually cause a massive transformation in the biochemistry of your body, all the way down to the genetics inside of your cells. So that's what really got me interested in hypnotherapy. I started exploring, is there ways in which shifts in perception can cause shifts in the physical material, nature of your body? And I trained in Chinese medicine, I trained in martial arts, and I actually started training other instructors in how they manage their energy and their consciousness to adjust their well-being. And not just in a kind of homely Tai Chi kind of way. I trained to medical levels with that in terms of Chinese medicine. And I spent a lot of time training other instructors up on how to manage their energy. And this is where a lot of them were coming to me saying, I've done all the physical work in martial arts, like kicking and punching and so on, but I'm noticing I'm getting ill quite a lot, despite how fit I am. And it was because they just hadn't really got their mind into a state of coherence with everything they were doing. And they came to me to look at the energy side of what they were doing, the spiritual side. So I spent many years doing that. But then there came a time when people started asking me, is this stuff that you can only help people with in terms of changing what they're manifesting in their body? Or is this something you can help people change in terms of what they're manifesting beyond their body out there in the world? Right. And I said, to be honest, I've not really looked at it, but I imagine it's possible. It would require certain kind of techniques. And for a long time, I was interested in parapsychology. I was interested in mind over matter. I was interested in telepathy, telekinesis, these kind of things. And I paid close attention to research that was going on in Princeton University, the Pear Lab, where they were doing lots of research into parapsychological activities and using instruments and technology to try and kind of sense things. And at the time, I thought, you know what? I want to look at this beyond just the body. There's plenty of evidence to show shifts in consciousness, shifts in perception cause material changes in your body. especially through your immune system, for example. But
Right.
can we do something where a shift in consciousness leads to a change in something beyond the body, out there in the world? And this it's around this time I started hearing about things like the law of attraction.
Right.
And here in the UK, they did a premiere of the movie The Secret.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And at the time, I actually knew the person who was doing the marketing for the film.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't heard about it at the time. And he said, "Oh, you want to come watch the premiere of this movie?" And I said, "Okay, I'll go and do this." And I learned all about the law of attraction. And I thought, this is amusing as a scientist. Someone's
Right.
talking about a law of nature. And I'm looking at it and thinking, nah, this doesn't work for me. Because the reality is, in the universe, mostly, whenever you come across laws in the
Mm-hmm.
universe, they typically have two kind of components to them. They have a component which is, shall we say, masculine, and
Yes.
then you have a component which is kind of feminine, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
And these two aspects of laws, they work together to create things in the universe. Just like a man and
Mm-hmm.
woman might come together and create a child, similar kind of
Mm-hmm.
principle. All right. And I looked at law of attraction and I thought, you know what, law of attraction does correspond to something that exists with a lot of laws of physics. Like if you look at electricity or magnetism or gravity, they all have attractive components to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, magnets can attract things and gravity can attract planets and so on. But then I thought, with a lot of these laws, there's also a law for, if you like, repulsion. There's a law
Right.
for detachment as opposed to attraction. So I looked at the law of attraction and I said, why doesn't it work for people?
Mm.
There seems to be something missing in the formula for it, if you like, you know. And I
Yeah.
tried to look at it from a science perspective, and I thought, well, if you look at it from a science perspective, we'd have to accept that no law operates by itself.
Absolutely.
All laws work with each other. They don't ever work in isolation.
Right.
And I thought that's the most important thing for me to be looking at here.
Mm-hmm.
That means there must be other laws that you need to work with in order to get manifestation happen, but also the opposite, to actually have things demanifest too. Because when it comes to things turning up in your life that you want and you're dreaming about and you know, it would make you happy, in some instances it involves you attracting something into your life. But
Mm-hmm.
actually, in other instances, it involves getting rid of something, you know, getting it to
Yeah.
repel and be moved away from you.
Mm-hmm.
So I discovered there was a complement to the law of attraction. And for the want of better words, let's call it the law of detachment. Okay.
Right.
And a typical example was you want a car, but you're not getting a car to manifest. And the reason is because you've already got a car in your garage, and the universe is looking at that and go, well, I've got nowhere to put a new car, so you're not getting one.
Right.
You know? So get rid of
Yeah.
the car that you got in your garage, consciously make space for it, and maybe that car will turn up, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's indicating that you can't just attract stuff into a space where things are already occupied. You have to let go of stuff.
Totally. And I think that I love that we're going into this because this is something that I talk about. The law of attractions is probably the most talked about topic when it comes to manifesting, but it is really it's such a small percentage of shifting your life, as you know, and people, it doesn't work because you have to do all of the other things in order to actually call in what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's so funny because The Secret was kind of where I started as well in this world of shifting, and I would get frustrated, and I remember reading the book and watching the movie, and all of it is very fascinating. But I remember at points in my life being so frustrated because I'm like, what do you mean it's not working, right? Because it's an oversimplified explanation of like, oh, the universe is just basically a magazine of all of your options. And you can just say, I want all of these things, but you're not going to bring them in
Well,
if you're not
imagine
aligning.
imagine trying to understand the universe just from the point of view of the law of gravity. Okay.
Right.
Now, if we just did that, we wouldn't have electronics. Electronics
Right.
relies on understanding the law of electricity and magnetism, electromagnetism. It even understands deeper laws to do with, subatomic kind of laws to do with like the weak force and the strong force, which hold the atomic world together. Now,
Mm-hmm.
you can't even really get a full grip of reality if you understand how all these forces work together. Now, an example is trying to go to the moon. If you want to go to the moon, you thought, all I need to do is overcome gravity.
Right.
You'd be sadly mistaken, because a rocket, yeah, it can give you fuel and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
but it requires, a lot of monitoring through electronic components and things
Mm-hmm.
like electrical fields and communications, all this kind of stuff, right? And even, some subatomic and nuclear physics as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Only when you have a full grip of a group of people, a community of people who work with all those different laws together, can you build a system that will take you to the moon? And it won't be something that relies just on the law of gravity being overcome. You know,
Right.
it's the same
Yes.
principle with this. If you want to elevate your consciousness to a higher orbit, shall we say,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, well, with a rocket, you can't just rely on the law of gravity. You have to look into all these other laws as well, right? It's the same thing with us as human beings. If we want to elevate our consciousness and go into a different kind of orbit with regards to how we look at the world, we can't just work with one law. And
Right.
what I realized when I started really looking into it, I thought, okay, so there's a law which you have to respect in conjunction with the law of attraction, and it's the law of detachment. And I thought, well, how do you decide what to let go of and what to attract, right? So if you
Mm-hmm.
just do it according to your desires, is that enough? So an example was I tried to look at a situation where someone was trying to get a house
Yes.
and they wanted that house, but there was somebody already living in that house, and they didn't want to leave because they were short on their mortgage and things like that. And it turns out they were fighting to stay there when somebody else was trying to, come in and buy that house and take over it. In that situation, who wins? Who gets to keep that house?
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that it's linked to a higher kind of principle in that situation. And that higher principle is one to do really with your will.
Mm.
It's to do with specifically with something that people call free will. Okay. Now, what's amusing to me is there are many people in this world, especially in the first world, if you like, who have freedom to do things that they do in a democratic environment and so on like that. And they think they have free will. The reality is their will is not free to
Right.
act. Your will at any given moment, it has obligations. Your will has obligations, for example, to your past, to baggage that you might be carrying, trauma, all these kind of things, right? Your will might be obliged to dreams, ambitions that you've got for your future that you
Mm-hmm.
haven't realized yet. Your will might be distracted in the current moment by loads of things that are going on around you which aren't aligned to who you authentically are. That means your will is having to use up all the energy you've got to deal with things from your past, to deal with things from your future, and to deal with things around you in the present. And if you look at how much energy is left over for your will to properly be powered to work on your intentions and manifestations of the current moment, you realize that probably about, it depends, it's different with different people, but on average, I found that there's about 30 to 40% of your energy that drives your will to do things is completely preoccupied with dealing stuff from your past. Okay. Another
Yeah.
30-40% is dealing with stuff to do with your future, setting yourself up for your future. And the remainder is just trying to deal with stuff in the present moment and often not necessarily your true, authentic intentions. It typically leaves around 10% of all the energy you have to power your will through your life for you to act on your intentions and try and manifest things into the world. Now, if you're only operating on 10% battery on your phone, you
Mm.
find that the display starts to dim, right? You find all the major power hungry things on your phone, they all start to shut down. So
Right.
it's the same thing with human beings. If most of your energy that drives your willpower is just not available to you, then your will is just not free to act. It's just not free to act. Now, if your will's not free to act, then that's one of the big drivers for manifestation. Because if you want to bring things into this universe, wherever you bring in, you're going to need power to bring it in. And this
Right.
is where your will comes in, your willpower. But if your will isn't powered, because all your energy is dedicated to try
Right.
and deal with stuff from your past, your future, and distractions around the present moment, then your will isn't in a position to pull energy into this reality, or even remove energy from this reality back into, another dimension. So for me, I found a person's intent to manifest something with all the attention that they've got is only possible if it's a process that's powered through their will. But if their will hasn't got the power, it doesn't matter
Right.
how much you dream, how much you feel, that stuff isn't going to come into existence.
Right. Enter detachment, right? Enter detaching. Am I
Well,
oversimplifying it? Like
yeah.
with
So detachment is a simple way of looking at it, but the
mhm.
reality is we're here only to let go of things once we've
Mhm.
learned from them.
Right, and they'll keep showing up in your life until you've learned from them.
Right. So the
Mhm.
importance is not necessarily detachment. You'll find detachment naturally happens once you've learned the lesson of whatever experience that you actually had. All right.
Right. Right.
Now, for me, this was a big revelation, right? And it was to do with life lessons. Okay.
Absolutely. Yep.
It turns out, I can pretty much guarantee you that the person who's learned life lessons
Mhm.
and acted on them and doesn't, overall make the same kind of mistakes over and over again,
Mhm.
they tend to do better in life than the person
Yes.
who doesn't learn from their life lessons and keeps making the same mistakes over and over again. As far as the universe is concerned, if I was a manager in a company, I saw someone making mistakes over and over again, I'd eventually think, you know what? I'm not going to give them responsibility. I'm not going to promote them. I'm not going to give them the resources to do what they have to, because they just waste them. They'll do that. Now, in the universe, if you have a human being
Mhm.
and they keep wasting resources and opportunities all the time because they just won't learn their life lessons, eventually the universes go, you know what, this unit of productivity in the universe is not very efficient. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to give him resources. I'm going to give resources to someone who actually has learned their life lessons. They're not getting in their own way, and they're able to be of more service to me, the universe. They'll give advantage to that individual. Um, and it's funny that we see this in the workplace, right? But
Mhm.
guess what? The whole universe really is a workplace for our spirit and who we are and what we're trying to do. And if we don't learn from our lessons,
Mhm.
we'll be held back. It's the same in school. People get held back when they don't learn what they need to.
I think that that is the element that separates people who are living their life that they're dreaming and those who are stuck, because the people that are stuck, they want to keep moving forward without acknowledging all of the things tethering them to their present circumstance and their past. So when we're talking about free will, um, if we direct our free will in the present to deal with the unwanted attachments or the lessons that we need to learn from the present and the past, then we're combining our energies, right? Freeing up more energy to focus on what we want to manifest in our life. Because, like you said, when you've learned the lesson, you're acknowledging the stuff in your life that you need to deal with. Natural detachment from those things happen, right? So it's um, like a simple example, having a history of making really bad friendships. Once you realize that the root of that is, oh, I keep attracting these same people over and over again because it's linked to my worthiness and how I view myself. Once I'm able to view myself from a higher level of worthiness, those people naturally leave my life, making room for better relationships.
And this is something I've talked about. I wrote an article on the science of attraction a long time ago, and one of the
Yeah.
things I raised was bad relationships. And I said,
Right.
look, how come this person keeps ending up with the same girlfriend or the
Mm-hmm.
same boyfriend or whatever? And I said, look, you need to look at it from the way the universe works at subatomic levels and scale that issue right up to human scales. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, in subatomic realms, bits of energy from hidden dimensions they can temporarily manifest into this world. But if they are not continuously supported with additional energy, they get sucked back to where they came from. Right? That's just the
Right.
nature of things. It's the nature of
Mm-hmm.
quantum physics. And often the kind of myth that people talk about or tale is it's a bit like robbing a bank. If you do it quickly and if you just borrow £1, people aren't going to, a dollar or something, people aren't going to notice those so much as borrowing $100,000. All right. So the bigger the amount you borrow, the more likely it's going to get noticed, and you're going to get caught, and you're going to have to pull everything back.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do something really quick, do something with it, and then put it back, the universe is not going to notice. All right. That's the way it works. But when it comes to relationships, I said, it's an interesting thing that actually happens. Um, and this is something where the universe is giving you something called a grace period. Okay. So if
Mm.
I make a decision that I want a new relationship in my life, okay, then, and I've actually let go of the old relationship,
Mm-hmm.
and there's space there for a new
Right.
relationship to come in, then there's a possibility that will happen, right? However, if I'm thinking about being in a new relationship, but I haven't quite let go of the old relationship yet, the feelings, the energy of it is still with me, then there's no room in the inn, for a new relationship to come
Right.
in. All right.
Right.
Now, let's say you have made the decision to let go of the previous relationship and you have fully detached from that relationship in terms of feelings and everything else, commitment and things like that, and you're ready to take someone new into your life. Sometimes, if you don't make a decision that you actually want a new relationship, because sometimes just saying I've let go of the old relationship doesn't mean necessarily that you want a new relationship. It's that you haven't said, I also want a new relationship. You've
Mm-hmm.
just said, I've let go of that relationship. So, as far as the universe is concerned, the only thing you're stating is, I'm in a state of being where I'm no longer attached to that. And that's what it's going to foster. But if, in addition to letting go of the previous relationship, you're interested in having a new relationship, you have to declare that. Okay. Now, if you don't
Yeah.
declare it, even in your mind, here's what happens: the universe gives you a grace period. And the grace period gives you one affordance, which is it allows you to think about whether you want something new to come in,
Mm-hmm.
or whether you just want to have things stay as they are, and for you to be single for a while. Right now, here's the thing: if you don't make the decision to just be single or start with someone new, the universe, after a grace period, it will
Mm-hmm.
go, you haven't made a decision, so I'm going to make one for you. And what it will typically do is it'll draw on the nearest previous experience that you've had and remanifest that.
It's fascinating because I would call that a test. Like if a client were talking to me about that, like I thought I've detached from that previous relationship. And then suddenly I'm like dabbling with the idea of, okay, I want to manifest a new relationship. If you're not fully committed
Yeah.
or decisive about what you want to call in, the universe will call in that energy in a way that you haven't fully detached from. This is how I understand it to be, so that you have the opportunity in that moment to engage in that past energy or to actually make a decision.
But here's exactly how the universe will see that you've made a decision. For
Okay.
example, if you just say, I'm interested in a new relationship,
Yep.
just having the desire for
Mm-hmm.
that isn't enough.
Right.
Okay. The way things come in, when I've looked at a lot of parapsychological research and also in mind body medicine, I found that there are three factors which define how things come into and out of reality, especially
Mm-hmm.
in mind body changes. They are intention, attention, and will. So the first thing is, all right, you let go of your previous relationship and you feel like you want to be in a new one. Have you formed an intention around that? Because if you haven't formed an intention, then there's nothing for you to pay attention to, right?
Right.
Now, you need to have an intention that you can pay attention to and do so in an ongoing fashion through your will.
Okay.
That's how things will manifest. They won't manifest instantly, but they'll begin the process of manifestation. And I compared this to making cookies. All right. And I said, look,
Okay.
let's say you want to make a cookie. You've got some dough. Do you just eat the dough? No, you don't just
Right.
eat the
Right.
dough. It's the
Right.
substance, but you don't just eat it. You
Yeah.
roll it out, and then what you do is you have an intention for how you want the cookie to look. Maybe a
Mm.
star, maybe a snowman, whatever, right? You have a cookie cutter. The cookie cutter is the equivalent of your intention. It's a blueprint for what you want to manifest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Out of the dough. So you put it on the dough, and you realize nothing's being cut out. It's the cookie cutter just sitting there on the dough, but it's not cutting out anything, separating
Okay.
something from the dough and giving its own existence, if you like. And that's when you realize, well, you can't just rest the cookie cutter on the dough. You have to apply some force on it. Put your hand on top of it and push it in. And only when you do that does a shape get cut out of the dough that you can separate out, and you now have an individual cookie that you can go and bake, right? Now,
Right.
that requires power, willpower. So you've got your blueprint, you've got your attention, you're paying attention to it by connecting the blueprint to the energy field, which is the dough,
Mm-hmm.
right? But until you apply will to it, it can't separate from the dough. It's still part of the dough, it's still part of the rest of the universe, and it doesn't have its own existence. But when you do that, you take it out, even that star shape you got in your hand, that's now separate from the rest of the dough.
Mm-hmm.
You can't eat it because if you ate it, you get sick because it's not being
Right.
cooked, right? So what you do is you put it in the oven, and you put it in for a sufficient amount of time for it to cook. And even when it's been cooked and you take it out of the oven, you don't eat it straight away because if you did, you'd burn your mouth, right? So
Right.
there needs to be a rest period after it's been created for it to acclimatize to a temperature that you can actually
Mm-hmm.
consume it with, right? Manifestation is very much like this. There is a universe of energy, which is like the equivalent of the dough. There is an intention that you have, a blueprint for what you want to manifest, which is like the cookie cutter.
Mm-hmm.
There's the attention that you pay to it, which is what you're doing with that intention. Are you putting it somewhere where there's energy that you can use to manifest something? And
Mm-hmm.
thirdly, have you put enough energy into it to separate it from the rest of the universe by putting some force and willpower on it? And then once you've done that, have you continued to pay attention to it to, cook it, so to speak? And
Right.
if you haven't put enough attention into it, you might find what happens is it manifests, but then it quickly gets demanifested. So a lot of
Right.
people who do law of attraction stuff, they have stuff temporarily appear, but then it disappears. They lose it.
It's like people who win the lottery, then they're destitute, right? Because they're not matching from an energetic perspective.
Their will isn't managing
R-
that attention properly on their intention.
Right.
That's the
So,
process, As long as you're managing your will and applying it to your attention, and the
mhm,
attention is being applied to an intention,
right.
then you will find over time that energy accumulates around that intention, and it begins to have a life of its own independently of the rest of the universe. At that point, just like helping a child to grow, there comes a point when the child can stand up on their own 2 feet and look after themselves. And as a parent, you don't need to worry about them anymore. They can go
Right.
out into the world, right? But up to that point, it's your responsibility to look after them. And if you let them go too early and let go of your responsibility too early, there's serious chance you could cause harm, or it could be damaged, or it could be lost, right? It's exactly the same principle.
So from an actionable perspective for people, since we're talking about relationships, what does that look like from the intention, paying attention, applying your will? Like what would be the steps that somebody would take for using relationships as an example?
Well, intention is an alignment thing, right? So
Right.
it's to do with what are you aligning to.
Yep.
Intention is saying, are you aligning to what's authentic in you?
Mm-hmm.
Are you aligning to a desire?
Yep.
And another way of looking at it is, are you aligning to a preference, or are you aligning to a priority? Are you aligning to what you
Mm,
want, or are you aligning to what you need? Right? These
right.
intentions often about getting a balance between those two things, right?
Right.
And there are a lot of instances where people have the intention to get something that they want, but it turns out it's nothing to do with what they actually need, right?
Right.
And
Yep.
vice versa. They have an intention to get something that they need, and even though it's something that's being of service to them and helping them, there's another part of them that's still not happy because it's not what they want.
Right. Okay.
Only, and this is where the happiness bit comes in. The engineering of this is such that if you can find a way for getting your needs to align with the things that you want and then invest in that, you'll never be unhappy because there's a harmony between what you need and what you
Mm.
want. Ideally, you want to manifest things which empower you
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to disempower you. I talked about this with people who are going through addiction, and I said, look, if you're someone who chooses something to support you over something that stimulates you, then you're always going to be doing something that empowers you and keeps you alive. On
Right.
the other hand, if you constantly give up what supports you for something that stimulates you, there's going to come a time where your life's nothing other than trying to find stimulation. And by this point, you've not supported yourself enough for so long, you've undermined your own vitality and how alive you are. And I
Right.
gave an example of being in the desert and said, if you're in the desert and you come across someone who can give you a drink, they give you a nice warm glass of water
Mm-hmm.
or a cool vodka and orange,
Right.
and which one are you going to pick? And depending on whether you like vodka and orange or not, if you pick the one that says, vodka and orange is nice and cool with some ice in it and things like that, what you don't realize is because of the way alcohol dehydrates you, in the end, that may stimulate you right now, but
Mm-hmm.
in the end, it's going to undermine how you're supported. But with support, if you take the warm glass of water, right now you might not be stimulated by it, but further down you'll be supported by it. And when you've got sufficient support in your life and vitality, you'll get stimulated by that. You'll become more alive, right? And this is the biggest challenge I found for most of my clients is being able to get the right balance between what supports them and what stimulates them. And,
Right.
if they indulge too much on the stimulation side and think, well, it's got to feel good in order for me to do this, they may miss out on a lot of support in their life. And as a result, they might not have the integrity in their being to be able to achieve things with the will that they've actually got because they're constantly putting their energy into the things that don't support them, you know?
Right. Right.
And the
So.
universe looks at that often and it goes, this person's constantly undermining themselves. And as my agent, they are not effectively going to be of value to me. So what the universe does typically is starts moving resources away from that individual
Mm-hmm.
towards others. And it's typically shown up in this law that all the other laws in the universe answer to, and that's the law of conservation of energy. So law of
Mm-hmm.
attraction, law of detachment, all the other laws that are out there, the granddaddy of
Mm-hmm.
all the laws are ultimately accountable to, is the law of conservation of energy. It says you can't actually create or destroy energy, you can only transform it from one kind to another, right? And
Mm-hmm.
whatever entity in the universe is best at respecting the law of conservation of energy, typically it gets more authority. It
Right.
typically gets more resources, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that means the law of attraction, every idea of manifestation really is not about one law, as I said. It's about how all the laws together answer to the law of conservation of energy. Because there's no laws in science which break or go against the law of conservation of energy. But in experiments, if anybody sees that the law of conservation of energy is being disrespected or violated somehow, they look back at the other laws and think, no, there's something wrong with them because nothing breaks the law of conservation of energy, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
any individual who fails to respect the law of conservation of energy and how they do things, typically will find it much harder to manifest. People who are authentic, for example,
Mm-hmm.
they're exercising the law of conservation of energy because they're not pretending to be something that they're not and putting energy into that.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the most basic actionable starting point there is. Be
Mm-hmm.
authentic, be true to yourself. And, in doing so, make sure who you are on the inside aligns with who you're being on the outside. Make sure there's alignment like that. If there's a disconnect, the energy is not going to come through properly out into the world. And also the world's energy isn't going to come into you properly. And if there's a
Right.
difficulty of exchange because there's a misalignment, that's actually going to be a lower level functioning of the law of conservation of energy. Whoever does that better, whoever can respect the law of conservation of energy consistently better, they typically get more authority in the universe. They typically get more resources to
Mm-hmm.
manifest or handle whatever they're actually doing.
Yeah.
Because that's the way the universe works. Its ultimate metric is how well are you respecting the law of conservation of energy in
Yeah.
your character, in your actions, in who you're
Right.
doing things with. Whoever does something better than somebody else, they'll always have more authority. They'll always have more manifestation capability, and they'll always ultimately win over in an argument compared to somebody else.
Right. So
Who gets?
it's so it's consciously deciding to exercise your free will in a way where you're just I guess you're deciding where to put your energy, right? And the universe responds accordingly. So if you're deciding that you want a relationship, but you continue to put your energy into meaningless conversations on an online dating app, the universe is going to respond in the like, right?
Yeah, well, the three laws I mentioned so far, I didn't name the third law, but I said there's law of attraction,
Yeah.
there's law of detachment, and the third law, which those two law answer to,
Mm-hmm.
is the law of being. Okay.
Mm.
Now, the law of being, who you are being, many people think who you are in any given moment is down to what you've added into your life and what you've taken away. That's a
Mm-hmm.
really simple way of looking at who you are as a person. You are the sum effect of everything that's been added into your life and everything that's been taken away, right?
Right.
If you sum that up, those two things, then the left, whatever is left, that's who you are. That's who
Mm-hmm.
you're being, right? And people think in order to manifest something or achieve something, they need to add certain things into their life or take certain things away in order for them to be who they want to be, right?
Right.
That's what they think the formula is.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is, it's actually the reverse of that. What you add into your life and what you take away doesn't define who you're being. It
Mm-hmm.
gives you the illusion that it's shaping who you are, but the reality is it's the other way. The other way is you first make a choice about who you want to be.
Right.
And even if you've done this unconsciously, the result of that choice about who you want to be determines what gets added to your life,
Right.
what gets taken away,
Mm-hmm.
what gets attracted, what gets detached. And think about it, right? Every time you made a choice to be someone different,
Mm-hmm.
did what came into your life and what left your life change?
Right. Yeah,
And I can
it's true.
absolutely bet you it did, because it's a
Absolutely.
principle that's scaled up from quantum levels. The universe, an atom or a molecule, is only the consequence, not necessarily of what was added to and what was taken away, but it's a consequence of the nature of field of energy around it that allowed for things to be added, that
Right.
allowed for things to be let go of,
Mm-hmm.
right? Once you make that higher level choice of who you want to be, and you align to that with intention, attention, and will, you find naturally things start coming into your life in
Yes.
alignment with who you're being.
Yes.
And naturally, things will be let go of in your
Yeah.
life in
Mm-hmm.
alignment with your way of being, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there are higher laws because you have to answer, well, all right, is there something in the universe that, governs who people are being?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a choice to be able to be somebody? Or are you forced into being somebody because of circumstances?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a higher law which manages being between people and across humanity and across all consciousness in the universe, if you will. I won't go
Mm-hmm.
into that here. I just want to, at least from an actionable perspective, just to let people know manifestation is about arranging your life so something can be added or something
Mm-hmm.
can be taken away or facilitating that. You're turning it upside down. you first have to make a choice about who you want to be. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
say the word choice rather than decision
Right.
because there's a distinction to me. Because a long time ago, someone said, how do you know whether you're choosing something compared to deciding something? They're
Mm-hmm.
not the same things,
They're not.
right? A choice is an active state of being that you're in. A decision
Mm-hmm.
is something where you're in an active state of being, but you don't know what the next thing is that you want to align to because of your values. You're unsure about your values and you have to weigh things up, and then you have to make a decision about putting your energy down one route as opposed to another. All
Right.
right. Now, the fact is, every time you make a decision, you split energy. Many people can look at the word decision, all right,
Mm-hmm.
and they might be able to relate it to other words that are similar to it. They're all to do with cutting and splitting. So,
Mm-hmm.
like decision, incision, excision, these are
Mm-hmm.
all cutting words, all right? So, when you make a decision, you're taking the energy you have in you and you're splitting it into two,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're giving some energy to what you actually want to be doing that's aligned to your values, and you're giving some energy to something that's not aligned to your values, all
Right.
right? Now, every time you split your energy, you have less energy, you have less vitality, you feel less alive. And the less and less alive you are, the more and more close you are to dying. So every
Mm-hmm.
decision you make takes you closer to death. This is why stress is such a bad thing for you, because often stress
Right.
comes about from people trying to make decisions, right?
Right.
Now, a choice is very different. A choice is you already are aware of what your values are. You don't, you're not foggy about them. You don't have to
Mm-hmm.
take a guess about doing one thing or another. You're just naturally drawn to the right thing
Right.
because that's what feels right. No decision was made. You
Right.
just were drawn to that because that's what aligns to your values.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know what your values are, but you were drawn to something anyway, there's a risk you can end up doing the wrong thing, right?
Right.
Now, when you make a choice by allowing yourself to follow through on your feelings and your instincts towards something, you have real clarity about your instincts and your intentions.
Mm-hmm.
You don't split energy. You've still got all of your energy. And every time you do that, you don't have a bit of energy gets detached. You keep all your energy and you
Mm-hmm.
stay with all the vitality that you've got. So that route, the choice route, always leads to life. The decision route always leads to death.
Which is the difference between living in your body as a whole versus living in your mind, or the battle that happens in your mind because you're being led by your ego, right? Versus
You're led by
instincts,
your ego. You're led by your preferences.
right?
You're led by things that stimulate you, as opposed to the things that are priorities for you, as
Right.
opposed to the things that support you,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to the things that are honoring your being, as opposed to fitting with certain behaviors. Right?
Right. Yeah.
These are important distinctions because
Mm-hmm.
the intentions, the priorities, and your way of being, these are deeper factors within you that you have a resonance with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the surface stuff is actually the debris or the leftovers of your historic intentions, priorities, and way of being. So here's what happens: you have an intention, and you start working on it. Over a bit of time, that intention changes and becomes something else. All right, but the leftovers, the debris of it, the waste of working with that intention, it actually becomes your interests. All
I
right,
see. Yep.
your preferences are a kind of residue of you having worked with certain priorities.
Mm.
Okay, your behaviors are a residue of you choosing to have a certain way of being. All right, so these things, the preferences, the behaviors, and the kind of interests,
Mm-hmm.
they are things that you show up in your personality,
Right.
right? But where they came from and where they're coming from is your character and your soul and the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
There, if you look down and trace them back to what they are now, you'll find that interest once used to be an intention. That, that preference on the surface once used to be a priority. That behavior on the surface used to be a way of being. And what a lot of people do is they relate with all that surface stuff.
Yeah.
They relate with the preferences, the behaviors, and the interests. And their current way of being, their current priority, and their current intentions could be very, very different at the character level. So you have to get past all this personality stuff, the preferences, the behaviors, and the interests. And if you reverse engineer them and go back to their origins, you'd find the current most valuable, authentic factors you've got to align to. That would, if you worked with them properly and invested in them, you would be honoring and being in alignment with the law of conservation of energy.
Wow. The starting point, as you said in the beginning, is I think where people miss the mark and continue to miss the mark is they don't actually know who they are at the core, because they're running away from doing that work, because it requires you to really look inward. And the external world, like you said, can be tools and clues as to the work that you need to do. And yeah, it's really sitting with yourself. And like you said, making that choice.
So that's sitting with yourself, which relates to what we were just talking about in terms of sitting with yourself. And
Yep.
if we go back to that, the idea of the cookie cutter being an intention, and you want to
Yes.
put something into the dough and bring it out. Most cookie cutters, they're made of something really hard, like metal or hard plastic or something like that. You're not going to find a cookie cutter that's made of clay
Right.
or of wax or something like that, because when you try and push that into the dough, you're not going to get a clear boundary kind of cut out of that. It's going to be fuzzy, right? So it's really important with intentions for them to be really defined, and for them to be really, what's the word that I've used is the phrase I use is called well formed, right?
Yes.
If your
Yes.
intentions are not well formed, or they're deformed, if you like,
Right.
you're going to get a deformed manifestation, right?
Yes.
No matter how much
Yes.
attention and willpower you put into it, it will become a deformed manifestation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest kind of recurring issue that I've had with my clients centers around this. It's to do with this recurring theme where people feel that they need permission to do something or be someone,
Mm-hmm.
right? And often the people who realize this after a while, they'll often empower themselves.
Right.
And they may use this phrase, where they say, you know what, I'm going to give myself permission to do this.
Yes.
Right? They don't need to get permission from somebody else. They need to give themselves permission to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
I had to bring them up on that. And I said, look, hold on a moment. There's something you need to understand about all words. Historically, all words, they've all come from sounds. And the sounds were meant to encapsulate energy of a certain kind. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why when in certain combinations these sounds are said, historically people would say someone's casting a spell. And this is
Right.
why when we talk about, getting the right kind of description of a word, we talk about spelling it out,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I said, there's a two-letter thing in the English language and Latin languages, and you'll find it at the beginning of a lot of words. And this two-letter thing is AU, okay? You see it in ancient sounds like om, for example,
Mm-hmm.
okay? But in the West, you'll see it in several words. You'll see it in the word author. You'll
Mm-hmm.
see it in the word authority. You'll
Yep.
see it in the word authentic,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And you'll see it in the word like authorized, right? It's the beginning of all those words. And of course, if some of you may know who's listening in, AU is actually the letters for the chemical symbol of gold,
Mm-hmm.
right? AU is also found in the beginning of the word aura,
Mm-hmm.
okay, because people are supposed to have a glow around them, right?
Yep.
So it's fundamentally to do with the essence of who you are. It's to do with
Mm-hmm.
the purity. It's to do with the light within you. Okay. Now I'll give you an example. When someone says, I need to give myself permission.
Right.
If I say to them, "Are you being authentic?" They say, "Yes, I am." So okay. Well, someone who's authentic is
Doesn't.
self-authorized.
Right.
they are their own authority. They are their own author. That's what
Mm-hmm.
it all comes back to the same root of the word author. All right.
Yep.
So when you're being authentic, you are self-authoring. You are being your own author of what you're
Mm-hmm.
creating in life. Now, if you are your own author, that makes you your own authority. All right. That means if you are your own authority, you don't need to give yourself permission.
Right.
You are
Yes.
already self-authorized.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the biggest mistakes a lot of people make, that they think, even when they're being authentic, that they need to give themselves permission.
Right.
So don't. You're already authorized. You're good to go. You don't need to keep waiting and
Mm-hmm.
telling yourself that you need to give yourself permission, because
Right.
that's still a barrier in your mind that you require authorization from somewhere.
Right.
And when you get there, you're already self authorized because you are the author of your own life. You're being authentic and you are your own authority. You don't need to worry about permission. What you need to do is just be. You don't need to make a decision about getting permission. You can just choose to
Mm.
be. You're already authorized. You're good to go. All right. And when a lot of people hear that for the first time, that being authentic means being your own author, it means
Mm.
being your own authority. And in that situation, you don't need permission from anybody to be who you authentically are. It suddenly gives them a huge sense of freedom.
Right.
It suddenly releases their will a little bit, because previously their will was waiting for permission, either
Mm-hmm.
from themselves when they didn't even need it, or from somebody else, or circumstances. And
Yeah.
now their will doesn't need that. It's now got a freedom to it they didn't have. Right? So part of being authentic is that you're self-authorized, and that means that you're free to act on your
Right.
power and your energy, right? So this is why being authentic is central to respecting the law of conservation of energy, and ultimately the universe smiling and you go, you're a good agent in terms of managing energy, therefore I'm going to give you a lot more freedom around it and what you manifest with it.
Right. Right. And authenticity is such a hot button word, and I think we throw it around a lot now, and it's something that people strive to be, but they don't quite understand what that means, living
It comes through.
authentically.
It comes through compassion.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't be compassionate towards yourself,
Right.
you will seek permission often from other people. And it's a matter of humility and nobility. The phrase I've used before is that there's a very fine line between humility and humiliation. Because if you lower yourself so much that people just walk
Yeah.
all over you, then what authority do you have?
Right.
You know, how can you afford to be authentic? You know,
Mm-hmm.
so it's really important to ensure that when you're being humble, you don't cross that line between being so humble that you end up going from humility to humiliation. You're no good to the universe if you're in a state of humiliation.
Right. Right. Yes, that totally makes sense.
You need to
And
be in a position where you have a nobility about you, but not in an
mm,
arrogant way.
right.
You need to recognize the value of your own gifts and
Yes.
express them into the world in a way which is of service to the people around you and in the universe. And in the olden days, that's what people in England and other places, they used to call individuals who actually really did that, they used to call them nobles, right?
Mm,
Because they had this balance of humility and nobility within them that led them to manage their energy in a way where they were an example to everybody around them, and they did everything they could to empower the people around them. Their nobility was something that served the people around them. And the funny thing is, often people who are genuinely noble, they
mm-hmm.
typically end up being typically humble. You wouldn't know how rich that person was.
Right.
You
Of
wouldn't know
course.
how powerful that person was. All
Mm-hmm.
right. But they didn't deny themselves the ability to exercise that power or use some of that wealth when it could help somebody else be prevented from crossing that line from humility and humiliation.
Mm,
And that's compassionate act, right? To do that.
yes.
So it turns
Yes.
out compassion, everything could be boiled down to one thing in the universe that would
Mm-hmm.
help you manifest stuff more effectively, it's about being compassionate. And it begins at home, like charity. You learn to be compassionate with yourself first. And the Tibetans look at
Yes.
compassion in a very specific way. They say that compassion is the ability to work with the truth in a way that gives you more life, right?
Mm,
If I tell you the truth in a harsh way and it makes you want to slash your wrist and be miserable, that's not a compassionate way of working with you. But
Right.
if I tell it to you in a way where you're enlivened and you feel like you want to do something about it, and you empower yourself to act on it,
Yeah.
then what I did with you was share the truth with you in a way that brought you to life. Therefore, what I did was
Yes.
an act of compassion. Now, when you do that with yourself, when you work with the truth in yourself in a way that brings you to life, especially if what you're bringing to life is what's authentic within you, then that act is something that highly respects, is highly aligned to law of conservation of energy. Because
Mm,
nobody wants to see energy wasted.
right.
Everybody wants to see energy do something, like bring someone to life or create something. And that's what the universe wants too, right? So
Hmm.
the most enabling way of manifesting anything in your life is through acts of compassion. This is why people talk a lot about gratitude and law of attraction and things like that,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But the real science behind it, where it all originates from, is being compassionate.
Mm,
And the
that's.
people in this universe who are the most compassionate,
Hmm.
they typically have the greatest resources around them, courtesy of the universe, because that's what the universe wants to cultivate ultimately.
Right.
If
Right.
you start by being compassionate with yourself, that's a little
Yes.
flag saying, universe, I, I'm ready to be in your service.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
What
you
a.
were talking about things with me originally about hiding in plain sight, right?
Yeah.
Compassion is one of those things that often is invisible. If it's really powerful,
Hmm.
it's not necessarily a visible thing. It's
Mm,
done in an invisible kind of way.
yeah.
If you do it for the sake of fame and glory and all this kind of stuff, then it isn't real compassion. There's an agenda behind it, you know.
Mm,
And the universe
yeah.
is not dumb. It can see people who are doing that kind of stuff for favour, shall we say,
Hmm.
and it won't assign resources or authority to an individual like that for the bigger things, for the wider things.
Right.
Um, so it's worth bearing in mind that when you're being compassionate, but you don't have an agenda behind it.
Yes, yes. Not doing it for external validation. That's ultimately what it is, right? You're
Yeah.
doing it because it's aligned with like who you are, who you've chosen to be.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the authentic compassion, if I was to put a phrase
Mhm.
around it, if you're being authentically compassionate, don't be surprised through synchronicities, coincidences, serendipity, if just stuff just turns up in your life constantly. Even if you didn't ask for
Mhm.
it, it just shows up because the universe is out to support someone who is doing the key service that it wants, things in the universe to be engaged with.
Yes.
It's just
Yes.
authentic compassion.
Oh,
Um, and it's not easy for some people to do because they're afraid of being themselves, truly authentic, being themselves.
yes.
And they're
Yes.
also afraid of working with the truth because they're afraid of how it might be confrontational.
Mhm.
Even if that confrontation leads to them being more alive ultimately and
Mhm.
having more integrity, a lot of people avoid it because
Yeah.
they just don't want to have the conflict. And
Mhm.
they'd rather pretend to be somebody else than deal with anything that might be confrontational, for example.
Yeah.
And the bravest people of all, they they won't consider that. They'll say, I have to find the courage to be myself in order for
Mhm.
me to work with the truth, so that energy isn't wasted
Yes. Yes.
and life
Yeah.
isn't lost. You
Right.
know.
Mhm.
So, despite all the physics and the technology and all the laws and principles, it's funny how it all comes down to really humanity within ourselves and how do we honor
Yeah.
that within ourselves and between ourselves.
Mhm.
So a lot of the work that I'm doing in businesses right now, especially with the use of AI and technologies like that, I've been saying, look, let's not take a human-centric approach to using AI and technologies. I've
Mhm.
actually used the words and said, we need to take a humanity first, humanity-centric approach to things. Because if
Yes.
we do that, the technologies will advance and enhance our humanity within ourselves and between ourselves.
Mhm.
It's gonna trigger a cascade, a chain reaction of compassion within
Mhm.
people, and as a species, humanity as a whole, we will advance. We will
Yes.
elevate in terms of our consciousness and our intelligence and all these things. It will happen,
Mm-hmm.
but only if we are humanity, take a humanity first approach to things. And in
Yeah.
practice, that just means being authentically compassionate in everything you're doing and working with the
Mm-hmm.
truth in a way, however hard it is, you promise to move through and work through
Mm-hmm.
in a way that's true to yourself.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not, for me, that's not a complicated instruction,
It's
but it's not
not.
easy. It's not
It's
easy.
it's not easy. It's simple, but it's very, very hard for people because they've lived so much of their lives totally disconnected from themselves and operating not from a place of compassion. And I think that that's beautiful, and people can really take from that stop worrying about stop worrying about anything other than you and who you want to be. And that's when the ripple effect of manifestation begins, right? It begins at that center, and learning how to.
Well, you're not looking after your own energy because that energy that you think is your own is not your own.
Right. It's not. That's right. It's
It's the
wasted
universe's
energy.
energy. And as soon as
Yeah.
you respect that and you start exercising the law of conservation of energy around it in a way that aligns with the truth, in a way that's authentic for you,
Hmm.
then you're going to find that the right things happen in your life. And what I mean by that is you might have some difficult things happen in your life.
Yes.
But these are the things that are going to generate the life lessons for you
Hmm.
that will facilitate you to converge towards being authentic and towards being compassionate. And when you look at everything in that way, that everything, when you really are coming from a place like that, is going to converge you towards higher and higher authenticity and higher compassion,
Hmm.
that makes you very attractive to the universe. Many people think about attraction towards themselves.
Yes.
Few
Yes.
people talk about attraction towards what the universe is calling for. And the
Mm.
more you're in service to that attraction, to what will be attractive for the universe, the
Yeah.
more likely the universe is going to facilitate things being attracted towards you. It's a mutual
Mhm.
thing, right?
Yes.
That's the
Yes.
relationship many people don't have with the universe. They think it's all about them.
Right. Right. It's like everything. It's a reciprocal. There's a push and pull.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's yin and
Yeah.
yang. It's a harmony of the
Absolutely.
two.
This was such a great conversation, Jazz. And I want you to tell people how they can find you. I mean, I'll put the links in the show notes and everything. But how can people work with you, find out more about, everything that you have to teach people?
Well, a lot of these principles I've been sharing with you, I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to find a way of encoding them into technology so that people
Mm-hmm.
could use this technology to converge that authenticity, to converge that compassion, so that it
Mm-hmm.
would increase the frequency of synchronicities and coincidence and serendipity in their life that would attract the right things into them being of service to the universe, right?
Right.
So my website, which is energydiamond.com, it was put together back in 2008. And it's because I've been doing this in person with people for so long. And I realized more and more people wanted it. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
all right, well, let me see if I can find a way of taking what I'm doing and putting it onto a platform where people can use it without me even being there.
Yes.
It was really important for my own ego to not be part of the equation with these things
Mm-hmm.
because this is about being authentically compassionate,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So the Energy Diamond platform was created in 2008 and it uses AI to look at your needs and the emotional and social intelligence with which you're trying to meet them. And it can read between the lines and it can discover what's your real intention here, authentic intention. What's your real priority? What's your real way of being underneath this personality? And how can we
Mm-hmm.
get alignment here so there's sufficient coherence for the energy to come through from quantum realms up into these scales, human scales, and beyond, into the universe. And when
Mm-hmm.
it's done right, especially together with other people, um, that's when things align in time, things
Yeah.
align in space, things align in consciousness. That's when you get synchronicities, coincidences, and serendipity happening with
Mm-hmm.
increasing frequency and intensity. So if you go to the energydiamond.com website, you'll
Mm-hmm.
see there's also a video there with Lily Mace. And it's 12 years ago. but it was held here in London at Windsor, just opposite the Queen's Castle. And it was a little gathering led by Marie Diamond, who many people know was associated with The Secret and the Law of Attraction and things like that. So she invited me there because of what I was doing in things I've been sharing with today. And
Right.
it was the Association of Transformational Leaders. It was the first meeting of that group of people, and Marie Diamond was leading it. So anybody who's working with energy in service to something beyond themselves,
Yes.
ideally the universe, that's what the ATL was all about. And that interview you'll see on the homepage of energydiamond.com. It's about 40 odd minutes long, but you'll find a lot of things I shared with you today. That's when I first started talking about them publicly. And who better to do it with than someone who's directly involved with things like The Secret and the Law of Attraction,
Of course. Yes.
being there. So it was great to be invited by her and then have this particular angle and perspective to show, look, the Law of Attraction by itself has a function, but its real power can only be cultivated when you use it in conjunction with other laws.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I did a workshop for all the leaders that day, including Marie,
Mm-hmm.
and showed them, right, this is the science behind all of this. And this is how you make this a sustainable thing that has increasing kind of consistency in how things are, enabled to be brought into reality rather than infrequent in a haphazard kind of way. You have something
Yeah.
that consistently happens with a certain kind of intensity and a certain kind of value for your authenticity and for your compassion.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been such a great conversation, and also want to just note that you're active on LinkedIn as well, so people can follow you on LinkedIn, see what you're up to, and we'll put all of the links, all the ways to find you in the show notes. And
LinkedIn, you might know something, a lot of stuff around coaching and AI and technology.
yeah,
But in my heart, I'm really focused on technology enhanced potential and
yeah,
technology enhanced empowerment.
mm,
So I can use all these industry words and professional terms, if you like,
mm-hmm,
but the spirit of what I'm doing behind all of that is I'm trying to find ways where I can combine human and technology approaches to enhancing a person's authentic compassion within themselves.
yeah,
And that's so that they can work with that together with other people in their life, but also in their workplace, and ideally, ultimately, right up to kind of societal levels, and even within government, for example.
mm-hmm,
Because a lot of these changes, they're not really going to happen unless they are radiated from the right levels of
absolutely,
society.
yeah,
So I've been talking about this from a point of view how a single person might do this sort of stuff.
mm-hmm,
But there's going to come a time when the people who are awake, they all need to come
yes,
together and
that's
make a
right,
plan, you
mm-hmm,
know?
yes,
So a lot of the work that I do on the internet is about that. And if you want to just look at that a little bit more, do find me on YouTube. There's a video called Awakening. What
mm-hmm,
stage are you at? And that looks at different stages of people who are awake and what affordances they have in manifesting
mm-hmm,
things. So we
mm-hmm,
look at people who know in our lives who we regard as people who are asleep. They're not
mm-hmm,
really awake at all to what's going on in the world. You have people who are sleepwalkers, who are sleepwalking way through life.
mm-hmm,
And then you've got people who are actually awake and can see each other and properly
yes,
work with each other, right? So that video, currently, I think it's about 160,000 views, that video, since I put it out. It's
mm-hmm,
really crazily popular because people want to know what level of awakening are they at and what are the
yeah, it's
signs and symptoms
fascinating,
for them to get to the next stage, you know?
mm-hmm,
And when the
yeah,
more awake that you are, the more authentically compassionate you actually become.
yeah,
And the more things you find that you can accomplish together with other people in the world. And that's always been my aim. So LinkedIn certainly shows me from a certain business sort of
mm-hmm,
perspective, but from a perspective of a soul or a spirit or a being, that video, the awakening, what stage are you at, is a really good video to look at how you can have a strategy or a plan to practically look at your current situation and understand how do you start turning this into something better?
Yeah. That's great. Thank you, Jazz. I'm so appreciative for you.
Well, I appreciate being given the chance to share this.
Mm-hmm.
It's the more it's out there, the
Mm-hmm.
more chance it is that the people who need it to come out of being someone who's sleepwalking their way through life
Yes.
to someone who's actually awake and get together with other people who are awake.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to happen, and the more chance that there's going to be an awakening happening in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's always been not a dream or a decision. As I said, it's always been a way of being for me.
Yes.
And I trust that everybody else who starts working with this, that's what it becomes for them. So thanks a lot
Absolutely.
today for Lindsey.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for joining me on the Hiding in Plain Sight podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and please take a moment to subscribe and leave a review. Feedback and episode ideas help us reach more listeners. I would love to connect with you further. You can visit my website at lindseymazza.com and add me on Instagram at @the_Lindsey_Mazza. Until next time, keep sharing your stories and vulnerabilities, because one story at a time connects us all.